God created a man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God created man, so man exists. The psalmist wrote, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars which you have ordained. Well, who is I? I is the observer who is looking at God's creation. So again, over and over again, the Bible says we exist within the universe. So, no problem with this one then. If you're an atheist, though, you have to answer the question, why should we exist within this universe? Well, first of all, if you have no real reason for the universe to exist, then you have no reason for anything within it, including us, to exist either. But even if humans did exist, why should they be conscious beings with the capability of comprehending the universe? Because according to the materialistic worldview, which is the logical outcome of atheism, our brains are just bags of chemicals formed by Darwinian processes over time. How can bags of chemicals be conscious? You ever think about that? I had an atheist write to me one time, and he was not happy with my work in astronomy and said, from where do you get the arrogance to deny the consensus view of astronomers? And I wrote back and I said, well, I don't think it's arrogant to deny the consensus view. I think science itself denies the consensus view. But we'll talk about that later if you want. From now, I want to focus on something a little more interesting. You're calling me arrogant, but according to your worldview, your brain and my brain are just bags of chemicals formed by natural processes. How can a bag of chemicals be arrogant? How can a bag of chemicals be self-aware? How can a bag of chemicals know what arrogance is? How can a bag of chemicals perceive arrogance in another bag? He didn't know how to answer any of that. You see the point I was making. He's making assumptions to even try to challenge me on these questions. My point was, well, before we talk about the stuff up here, let's look at the foundation of your questions and see if they make any sense. And they don't. Bring this up with atheists who have thought about such things, and you're likely to get, well, we know that we exist. I mean, Descartes figured this one out a long time ago. I think, therefore I am. There's somebody thinking, right? Therefore I exist. Well, the question isn't whether or not you exist. Again, I agree we exist. The question is, why should we exist if the atheistic worldview is true? Why should we be conscious? A lot of atheists will say, well, consciousness is an emergent phenomenon. When matter is complicated enough, consciousness just comes out. So really? Well, show me that in the laboratory, please. Of course they can't. More and more people are saying consciousness is actually just an illusion. So, okay, well, let me get this right then, Mr. Atheist. Okay, so you're saying consciousness is an illusion? Yes. So you aren't really a conscious being because your consciousness is an illusion? Yes. But you're making so who then is telling me that consciousness is an illusion if you're not really there? If you don't really have a consciousness, then what being is communicating or trying to communicate this thought to me? And if our brains are just bags of chemicals and our thoughts are merely chemical reactions within them, which is ultimately what atheism requires, can chemical reactions really discern truth? Don't you need consciousness for that? But consciousness is a non-material thing which the materialistic view ultimately has to deny, which is why they're saying it's an illusion and so on. Laws of logic, another requirement for science. As Christians, not a problem. Come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord. God thinks logically and expects us to do so as well. So as Christians, we can affirm logic. We can affirm that logic comes from the Creator, that it's abstract and non-physical, and that it's absolute and universal because it has an external source. The atheist, however, has no real basis for logic. Why is that? Because the atheistic universe is just matter and energy. Remember, it's materialism is the underlying idea here. Only that which is material is real. There was a debate a few years ago, well, quite a few years ago now, between an atheist and a Christian. Gordon Stein, famous atheist at the time, and Greg Bahnsen, a Christian professor. And Stein got up there using the usual, oh, God is evil because this, that, and the other, and the Bible is wrong, and blah, blah, blah. And Bahnsen said, you know, I disagree with all that, but set that all aside. Dr. Stein, you're a materialist. I read your works, you're a materialist, right? Yes. That means only that which is material, that which is physical, can be real. Yes. Well, therefore, you deny laws of logic, don't you? What? Stein didn't know what he was talking about. Well, laws of logic aren't physical things, they're not material. I mean, you can't hold a law of logic in your hand, right? It's just a concept. It's mental rules that we use. But your worldview denies that anything non-material can exist. Since laws of logic are non-material, you're denying that logic can be true because If it can't, something that can't exist can't be true either, can it? Stein had no answer for that. And he tried to get her out of it the rest of the debate, and Bahnsen just kept hammering him. Stop bringing up all these other topics. You need to establish a foundation. What right do you have to be even using logic in our argument here, in our debate here this evening, when your worldview actually says it doesn't exist? So a consistent atheist can't actually affirm the truth of logic. Now, they'll say, well, we can use logic because it works. Well, I agree that it works, Mr. Atheist, but your worldview says it shouldn't. Some will say, well, logic is just a human construct. It's a convention that we decide to use. Well, that doesn't work either, because if we choose to use it, we can also choose to use different versions of it or choose not to use it at all. Is science going to work if an equation can be both true and false at the same time? Or does science require logic to be true in order to work? I think the answer to that's clear. Sometimes you'll hear, well, I'm an atheist, but I can still use logic anyway. Well, yes, that's because you're acting like me, a Christian, instead of acting like a consistent atheist.